Wouldn't it be neat if we all had our studios in Hollywood, California, where we had a parade of beautiful, tight-skinned movie stars coming in for their sitting day after day, where we didn't have skin problems, we didn't have weight problems and things like that? Well, that might be pretty nice, but the reality of it is that most of us in this business are out here in the woods or out here in the rural America, and we do have people come in who do have problems. We have problems with overweight. We have problems with wrinkle or textured skin. We have problems with large ears and glasses and many, many things that we, as professional photographers, if we really believe in ourselves and believe that we are professionals, must learn how to solve and how to correct. This camera right here, or whichever camera you're using, I consider almost an optical surgical tool, almost like a doctor who performs plastic surgery. If you learn the many, many techniques that help you correct the problems that your customers have, your customers are going to love you and you'll think you're in Hollywood even if you aren't. There will be many, many techniques that we'll talk about in this corrective photography tape. And what we want to do is visit about camera techniques, lighting, and many, many other techniques that you can use that will help you solve the many problems in corrective photography. Let's talk now about a problem that if you correct this problem, you'll get proposals of marriage. I guarantee you that. It's one that's fairly prevalent in our area. What it is this loose neck situation that we get on middle-aged women, and we're going to use our beautiful model Henny here. We're kind of abusing Henny today, aren't we? But she's consented to let us point out this situation. Now, it's a kind of a loose neck, loose skin right in this area. Now, we want to first make the point that in order to correct the problem, we first need to bring it up so we can visit about it. You don't want to just run up to your customer and say, hey, you got turkey neck, or you got saggy neck. I can fix that. We need to visit a little bit about it. And of course, if you'll look at the psychology module that we have done on the video series, you'll see that I visit with every customer, every sitting, every subject before we actually go into the camera session. I think this is paramount. And one of the questions I always ask them is there anything special they'd like to have me do for you? Or is there anything that bothers them or has bothered them about their portraits in the past? Now, almost invariably, the subjects will bring up the fact that, well, I've got this double chin, or I've got these wrinkles, or I've got a round face, and boy, that's the opportunity for you to step right in there using the psychology that we talked about in the psychology module, and step right in there and tell them, well, would you like to have me take care of that? Once the problem is called to your attention, wow, it's just gangbusters from there on. So let's come in and let's assume that we visited with Henny, and she has said, well, Marty, what bothers me is my neck here. It just bothers me so much. Every photograph, I got this saggy, baggy chicken turkey neck deal, and we call it we call it turkey neck. If we can come in just real tight on that neck with the camera, we'll just whack Henny's little old forehead off there, and we see this problem right here. Okay, so that's the thing that we want to get rid of. Now I'm going to teach you an idea, as I said, that'll get you proposals of marriage here. And what it involves, once we talk about the problem, what it involves is simply using a piece of Scotch tape, and we're going to just do like the plastic surgeons do, and we're just going to bring that Scotch tape around, and we're going to tighten that, and then we're going to take a beautiful portrait of this pretty young gal, and we'll show you the results in just a little bit. Now, if we can bring the camera back, there's a kind of a little special trick to this that I want to demonstrate in the video module. Here's the Scotch tape that we'll use, and it's just a regular, normal, clear Scotch tape, not the releasable kind. That doesn't stick very well to human skin. Now, I'm going to draw off plenty here, so it'll be a strip about 20 inches long. Now the reason I do that, and this is the trick to this little trick, a trick to a trick here. The reason I do that is because we want to lay this along the side of her neck here and get it sticking really, really good. And then we want to do the same thing on the other side. And then we're going to pull it back like we're driving a horse's reins. And I'll pull it back like this. I'm just going to demonstrate this like I was behind her. I'll pull it back, tighten up the neck, and then pinch it off. And that's how we'll do that. And now, if we can have a little close-up here on the neck, we'll come in here, and we'll demonstrate the problem here. Now watch it disappear as I pull back on the horse's reins. It's gone. Now we'll just come in here, and we'll cinch that. Problem solved. Now you've got this little bit of tape, if we can demonstrate this, hanging back here, that you want to be careful doesn't appear in the portrait, but we'll just stick it back here. You can even take a pair of scissors and just clip it off. But the problem now is solved. If we can have a close-up now on the neck situation, no movement or anything. Okay, and so that's how we would take care of that problem. Now, this may be a little uncomfortable for the subject for a few minutes, but I'll guarantee you, when she sees that portrait with that neckline cleaned up as though she'd had $4,000 or $5,000 worth of plastic surgery for that portrait that she's going to be viewing on her wall in her home for years and years, she will, I have actually, and this is the truth, I've actually had ladies come up and hug me and kiss me for that. Let's take a look now at Henny's finished portrait, and you'll see the neck line is nice and clean, and we've put her in the environment that'll make a beautiful portrait to hang on her wall so she and her family can treasure for years and years. Now, if you would have just a little bit of the tape show around the edges, or a little bit of a wrinkling there caused by pulling the tape back, don't be alarmed. Look at it this way. A tiny bit of retouching to remove that minor problem is much, much better than a major overhaul on the neck, trying to remove all that heavy hanging turkey neck. So look at the good side, and very seldom do we have any problem with the tape showing, as you've seen in the video. But if it does happen, a little retouching, take quick care of it. One of the prevalent problems that we run into as professional photographers almost on a daily basis is rough or textured skin. Now that could be in the form of wrinkles in older folks, but even in younger people. We have the acne problems, the blemish problems, and just pitted skin or rough textured skin. Now we can handle this in two ways. We can look at it as a character study where we want to pop out that texture in the skin, and we can have beautiful portraits in that sense, but we can also look at it as a corrective measure that we as professional photographers should be able to know how to handle to minimize that texture and to be able to please that customer with the portrait that's going to be hanging on the wall in their home for years and years. Much of this we can handle through lighting, and when we do the lighting for a wrinkled or a textured skin, I think it's very important to understand the fact that when you skim light across the edge of a surface like this, you're going to have a tendency to pick up or enhance that texture. So that would be the technique that you'd want to use if you're doing a character study where you really wanted those lines, those beautiful lines, and that texture and that character in the face to just pop right out at you. So that would be the technique that you would use then. You would skim the light across to create highlights and shadows in that texture. And we're going to use, for the purposes of this a little demonstration here, a piece of textured wall board. And when we come in close, we're going to have a section of it about the size of a human face. And then we're going to work with the textured wallboard to show how it affects, the lighting affects the texture on it. So let's do that now. We'll show some texture here. We'll show the lighting from the surface, skimming across the edge of it as though you were in a plane high above the mountains and the early morning sun is skimming across the edge of the mountains. Now, let's see what happens when we bring that light back and we get it closer to the axis of the camera. We'll move it in and you'll see immediately that we begin to lose the texture. Now this would be the technique that you would use if you wanted to minimize that texture. Now let me make this point too in the demonstration. When you bring that light back, you also bring it closer to the camera, further from the subject, so that you diminish the contrast. And it's also a good idea to diminish texture or to make wrinkles seem not quite as bad as they are, to bring the fill light in closer. So what you're doing is you're bringing the fill light in closer to the camera axis, the lens, and you're bringing the main light or the key or modeling light in closer also. And then you're diminishing the contrast ratio so that what modeling you do have is very, very gentle. Now let's come back and let's bring the main light back and talk about another technique called diffusion that also helps us break up that shadow line so that the wrinkles or the skin problem, blemishes, become less and less obvious. So if what we'll do now is we'll just drop into the camera the diffusing device, and look at what happens. Isn't that dynamite? There's the complete technique that you would use to minimize the wrinkled or the textured skin. Let me just say one more thing. One other little trick that you can use is just size and distance. Anything that is farther away from the camera is diminished in detail. So the wrinkled or the textured skin will not appear quite so strong and quite so obvious if you, and the wrinkled necks and things like that won't appear quite so obvious if you keep the camera a little further away from your subject. But don't want to give that retoucher too small a head to work on, so keep that in mind also. Let's see how this lighting technique that we used on the textured card works on a model here. And we've got Henny back, and so let's demonstrate this. Let's first demonstrate what would happen if we wanted to do a character study with Henny. So we would come in and we would skim the light across the surface of her face like this, and wow, look at those. Look at that texture and those beautiful character lines pop right out. Isn't that something? Now, if we wanted to even enhance this character study, we would feather our fill just a little bit. And now I'm going to feather that fill just a little bit more. Okay, that's about right there. Isn't that dynamite? So this is the technique that you can use if you actually want to accentuate those wrinkles or that texture of the skin. Now, let's bring the fill back. We'll bring it in close to the camera. We'll have a nice wide non-specular fill close to the camera lens axis. And now let's bring back the key light or the main light, and we'll bring it back toward the camera, keeping the light on the face. And we will actually almost create a situation where we have two fills, a very, very gentle lighting ratio, and bringing the main light back toward the axis of the camera as far as we can go so that we can fill those shadows and diminish the texture by decreasing the ratio. And what modeling does show will be diminished in ratio, and that will enhance the skin and diminish the texture. Now, we can do one more thing. We can drop in our diffuser, so we'll do that now. We'll just drop the diffuser in. And look at that. Look at the effect of that. Let's raise it up again and drop it back in. See that effect? Now, let's do one more thing before we leave this pretty model here. Let's go in and demonstrate the effectiveness of that diffuser, even in a character study situation, because we can certainly use that. So we're bringing the light back in. Okay, and we're going to skim across the face to enhance those wrinkles. And then we're going to start feathering the fill now. So we'll feather that fill. And wow, just look at that. Now, let's bring that diffuser back into the camera. And then, okay, look at that, how it just softens that shadow edge. Now let's raise it up, drop it back in. What a demonstration. Okay, these are some of the tools that you can use to diminish or even enhance the texture of the skin, depending on what you're after in the particular portrait. Let's talk about a quick little exercise that we can use to correct a minor problem. Now, my friend Otto's barber left town here the other day, and he got his hair cut, and it wasn't quite the way it should be cut. Now, he's got this little problem here with the hair sticking out, and we have sprayed it 3 or 4 times with hairspray, and we cannot get it to stick. Just absolutely impossible to get it to stick. So don't overlook the beauty of our friend Scotch tape, because we're going to take a little piece of this Scotch tape, probably about 6 or 8 inches long, and we're going to use it to stick Otto's hair down. So the way we'll do this is just bring it along, catch just the very edge of that hair, and then we're going to stick it down to Otto's hairline, pushing it down fairly strong, and now we have it fixed. So, and you notice it doesn't show up in the photograph at all. There are also other uses for Scotch tape. I use it almost every day in my camera room. I don't know if you can see this good. Maybe we'll come in kind of close here with the Scotch tape. You just take off about 1 inch of it, and then just circle it around and stick it to itself, so you've got a little circle here. And I don't know if you can see that very well, but anyway, it's all sticky on the outside, this little circle. So now we're going to go ahead, and if you got a collar that just won't stay down, it just keeps, Otto's is pretty good here, but occasionally you have one that just won't stay down, we'll stick that right under here, and then we'll just stick it right in there. And voila, it is taken care of. Another one that's common too, occasionally someone will come in and have a shirt that gaps just a little bit. We'll just take another little circle of Scotch tape, stick it in there, and it's very, very effective for that, as long as there isn't too much stress on that particular problem. You notice Otto's hair is staying very, very nice. Excess weight. We have an epidemic of it in our country today, and it's something we face every day in our studio. I'd like to introduce you to Helen, my friend, and it's a little tricky to invite someone in to model for you who is carrying a little excess weight, and what do you tell them? You know, Helen, I need you to come in because you're a little heavy, but we appreciate Helen coming in. We want to demonstrate how we would handle the situation through a series of techniques in lighting, posing, and our tools in photography. The first thing we want to demonstrate as we get into this particular session is we want to eliminate the high-key background. I think it's going to give us a little trouble working with it, because when we finish this portrait, we will be using a low-key background to a great advantage. So let me just roll this background up into our low-key background, and then we'll begin posing and lighting Helen to take advantage of her beauty and to minimize her weight problem. Now, I know this looks pretty stark right now, but when we finish with it, it'll look really good against that low-key background. First thing we want to do, Helen, is we want to ask you to just stretch forward, put your arms right on the counter here. We're going to turn you just a little bit, and we're going to turn the head just a little bit, tip the head, and then extend that neck just a little bit, just like that, and I'll have you looking right up here. A little too much head tip, right about there. Oh, what a gorgeous creature, huh? Now, let's talk a little bit about the pose. We want to pose her like this to stretch her out, to get the head out and minimize the bulk of the body. We also are going to raise our camera angle so that our camera angle is right about up in here, so that we'll be coming down. Again, the head is going to be emphasized, the body de-emphasized. Now we will begin to light our subject, and the first thing we want to do is we want to bring the main light in and just draw a nice little strip of light right across Helen's face. The purpose of this demonstration is to show how you can do a portrait of a person who's a little heavy and who's wearing not the proper clothing and still have something beautiful for her to take home. Aren't we having fun, Helen? Okay, that's it. Eyes right up here. Okay, now we can't see the lighting very well yet, but just give us a second. We're going to feather our fill here, and we're going to take it down just a little bit. That's it, just a little bit. Super, right there. Now we begin to see the effect of our light. We may bring it in even a little bit closer. And what we're trying to do now is cast the light off the shoulders and off the sides of the face so that we slenderize that face. And then we're going to bring our head screen in, or we call it a gobo too, and we're going to knock some light off the shoulder. That's going to be good right about there. We don't want to cut into the chin. That's going to work just about right there. Super. Now we're going to go around, and this area is getting a little dark. We're losing a little separation right in here. So we're going to enter the Mr. 4-inch photogenic light, and we'll just cast a little strip of light right down here, being careful not to get on the shoulder. That's how we're going to work it, right about in there. Okay, then the last light that we want to place is our background light, and we'll bring it in, and of course we want it to de-emphasize the left side of Helen, and we're going to emphasize the right side where we'll have the highlight shadow, so it'll emphasize this side right here. And that completes our lighting for this demonstration, and you'll notice how nicely it treats her. The final thing that we want to do is drop into the camera the vignetter and the combination vignetter and diffuser, and we will vignette right into the clothing, so we pick up just a little gentle portion of those shoulders. We've seen how to handle the overweight model who wears the improper clothing. Now let's demonstrate how to put it all together. Proper clothing or good clothing, props, lighting, all of our tools, and we'll start that now. We'll start our demonstration here now by posing Helen. We'll turn you just a little, Helen. I'll have you bring this hand up here, bring this hand right up here. And what we're doing now, we're using the famous H&H technique, how to photograph overweight people, how to do corrective photography. And the H&H simply means hunting for something to hide your model behind. And in this case, we're going to use the chair, and we're going to eliminate some of the weight by just simply proper posing. I'm going to sneak around here behind Helen. We're going to refine the pose a little bit. Now we want to bring this hand up, kind of turn it a little bit. We're going to turn you just a little, Helen. Just turn your feet there so you don't pop back. Bring the chin around, and then just a little tip. Okay, just a nice gentle hand there. Okay, we've got Helen in the proper pose. The second thing we want to do now, we want to eliminate the high key background or the medium key background. And I believe we can have so much better control in these corrective situations, in most cases, with the low key background. There we've got the proper background, and when we finish with this, of course, it'll all be in the proper perspective and in the proper tonal range. And the next thing we want to do then is we want to bring our main light in, and we're going to bring it in very tight. We're going to pinch the barn doors together and just lay a little strip of light across Helen's face here. Isn't she a gorgeous doll? Okay, now we want to avoid light on the chair. The last thing we want is a hot chair. And then the next thing we want to do is we're going to feather our fill now. We're going to take that fill down so we can kind of see where we're going. That's good. That's about right there. Okay, great. Now we've got a pretty good lighting on there. We'll refine it later if it needs to be. Now we're going to work on our background light. We're going to come in, and of course we want the background light sort of to emphasize the side in which the main light is on. So that would be this side right about in there, I think would work good for the background light. Okay, looking good. Now, we have an area in here that needs maybe a little separation, so we're going to bring our 4-inch photogenic light and just cast a little bit of a nice light on there, avoiding the shoulder. And that's our basic lighting setup for this. Now we're going to come back a little with the camera. That's it. And then I think we're going to take a little head screen in here as a final element and just hold a little light off Helen's hand so we don't have a hot hand. Right like that. Now, the final step in this lighting and demonstration of the overweight subject with the proper clothing, proper props, and the proper tools. We're going to drop into the camera our little vignetter diffuser combination, and we're going to vignette right into Helen's elbow. And look at that, isn't that dynamite? She's going to love you when she sees this portrait. Small things mean a great deal when we're doing corrective photography for overweight. A little thing like shifting weight from one foot to another can add a lot of bulk or subtract a lot of bulk to your subject. Helen, if you will just go ahead and shift your weight on your left foot and relax your right knee, we can demonstrate this. If I bring the ruler up here and come in, and we find that we have a 16-inch width. So she appears to be 16 inches from the left thigh to the right thigh. Now, Helen, if you will just put your weight on your right hip, relax your left knee, we'll go back down and we'll measure the distance, and we see that it measures to be 9 inches. So we have reduced the apparent bulk in the thigh area considerably when we just use the proper weight. I think the rule, a good rule to follow when you're doing corrective photography for a heavier person, always have them put the weight on the foot furthest from the camera and relax the knee closest to the camera. Let's go to our low-key background and try one final pose in our session on corrective photography for an overweight subject. Let's bring a chair in here, Helen. We're sure having fun, aren't we? And then we're going to lay a hand here. Let's just make a little point here while we're in this position here. Let's show how you can minimize the bulk of a subject by hand position. You bring this hand back here, you bring this hand out here, and you have widened her out this much. Now watch what happens when we get the hands in the proper position. We bring this hand in here, and let's just get rid of this hand. There's no reason why we have to have both hands up there. Just because you were born with two, that doesn't mean you have to use them both. Okay, so that would be the basic position, and we may correct the head position just a little bit, a little tip, Helen, and we'll make a little correction on the clothing there, come down a little with the chin, right about in there, eyes right in this direction, good. Now what we're going to do is bring in our highlight. What we want to do in this is we're going to do a very dramatic lighting with Helen, and we're going to cast a highlight across the front of Helen, and then we're going to diminish the fill, feather the fill, so that we have a real dramatic portrait. Now what we want to do is feather that fill, okay, a little bit more, right about in there is going to be dynamite. Okay, now what we want to do now, very, very important for this particular pose, we want to almost eliminate the background light behind her. So we do not want the background light to be intense behind her. We want the background light to come almost all of it in front of her, and I'll show you why we want this in just a minute. Okay, great, right about in there. The next thing that we want to do is we are going to put just a little bit of light here on Helen's hair, just to pick up a little separation right in there, but we definitely don't want it to come down into the body. The final thing that we want to do is, I'll get back around here to the camera, the final thing that we want to do is drop in our vignetter and our little combination vignetter and diffuser. We'll drop that right in, and we'll vignette right into the back of Helen, right below the elbow. It's that's it, right in there. That's just perfect. And this is going to be a dynamite portrait. When she sees this, I'll get a proposal of marriage. How do you handle the problem of large ears in your studio? Now, I've invited Otto to come in, a friend of mine here, and it's kind of a little ticklish situation, isn't it, Otto? You ask a guy to come in because he's got large ears. But Otto's consented to do that for me, and we really appreciate that. The first point we want to make in the correction of larger ears is this. we must obviously get a background that is more in tone, in contrast and density with his ears, because by putting Otto on a very light background, what we're doing is we're actually enhancing the size of the ears or making them look larger. And of course, this is not our job as professional photographers. Our job is to optically remove those ears or diminish the importance or the attention that the viewer might devote to those ears. Let me bring up this point at this time. We don't always in corrective photography need to eliminate the problem, but we should minimize it or concentrate the emphasis on the areas other than the problem. So the first step we want to do in the correction of this problem is get a background in here that's a little more conducive to the blending in of the ears. Now we'll raise this white background back here, and I think you'll see instantly that the little more darker background helps out immediately with the problem. Now we have a less contrast in color tone and density with the background, so that helps. The second thing that we want to do now in our corrective procedure for larger ears is this. It's a little technique that I call the H&H technique. I devised it in my studio, and I named it, for better words, I call it H&H, which means hunt for something to hide the problem behind. Now for a heavy person or something we might use a prop, but for Otto here we're going to hide one ear behind his cheek line. So I'll ask Otto just to turn his head here just a little bit, and this ear right here disappears as if by magic behind the cheek line. So we're hiding it. That's the H&H technique, hunting for something to hide it behind. The second ear over here we need to remove optically by throwing it in shadow. So that's what we'll start now. We'll first put our main light in the general area that we want it. So we'll bring the 16-inch photogenic parabolic in. We will pinch the barn doors down fairly strong, about this wide. And we'll come in here and we'll lay a strip of light. This would be a kind of a dramatic impact painting with light technique, which we've covered in another module on dramatic impact photography. We'll paint a strip of light across Otto's face, keeping it off the ear behind just in case it peeks out a little bit, and keeping it off this ear. Now you don't notice it right now, but when we feather the fill light, then you'll see the difference. Now I'll first turn the house lights down so we can see the effect of the fill. There we go. Now I'll start to feather the fill until we get the fill down right about there. I think looks pretty good. We may refine it a little bit later on. And now we'll come in a little closer here, and what we want to do now is work on the background light. Now let me point out a little problem you might have here if you don't watch your background light. We can light this background behind his ear, and again, what have we got? We've got a light background, so we've got too much contrast. So what we want to do is bring this background light in fairly close to the background, and then we want to feather it to Otto's left side, the side where we've hidden the ear, because the last thing we want to do is build up that contrast between the ear that is showing and the background back here. Okay, now we will, if this bothers you, the fact that we've got a darker area along this side of the face, what we can do now is we can go ahead and lay a little strip of light. We'll bring in our photogenic 4-inch light, and again we'll pinch those barn doors down so that they're just real closed, about like so, and then we'll bring the light in and we'll just lay a little strip of light right along in front of that ear, being very, very careful not to hit the ear, and there's about what we would end up with. Now what I would do before I put this little strip of light in here is I would make a couple, 2 or 3 exposures with just the dark background, or the dark shadow side, so it would look like this. Then I would go ahead and make 2 or 3 exposures with the little strip of light there. That's it, just right there. Okay, now you put a portrait like this in Otto's portfolio, and you've made a friend for life. There are several ways we can correct for this problem that we run into occasionally. Our pretty model Becky has consented to come in and let us show some techniques to correct for this problem. She has a chin that's a little stronger than the rest of her face, although she is a very pretty girl. But what we'll do now is we'll demonstrate some methods that we can use to correct the problem. Let me point out one thing. The way Becky's face is shaped, we do need to photograph her from the front if we're going to use a standard normal lighting. But let's demonstrate some ways that we can do some very, very nice portraits of Becky and diminish the attention to the extra chin. This is one method we can take care of a chin that needs a little de-emphasizing. See, we've blocked the light from the chin with the hand, and we've also hidden the chin with the hand. Another method that you can correct to de-emphasize the heavier chin or the larger chin is using a head screen. Notice the area of the chin is shadowed, so it is de-emphasized. The main intensity of our key light is in this upper area. Let's drop the head screen away, and you can see what happens to the chin. It's emphasized again. Now, another way that we can use this same basic posing without the head screen is to go ahead and bring the hands up. We'll bring the hands up, and we'll just cover a little bit of the chin area. Not much. Chin down just a little, Becky. Beautiful right there. So that'll help too. And then, since the hands are kind of warm, let's just bring the head screen back in. We've hidden a portion of the chin, and then we have gone ahead and we'll just diminish the light on it. And there you have a lovely portrait that I'm sure she would enjoy. And we've corrected the attention to the heavier chin. The double main backlight technique is something that you can use when you have serious problems on the frontal plane of the face. What we do is we place a light along the side of each face with the two 16-inch parabolic main lights. Then we light the frontal plane of the face only with the fill. Now, this is a great technique for disguising or diminishing the importance of wide noses. I once photographed a gentleman who had a nose that was literally wider than his mouth. And when we did the double main backlight technique, it effectively diminished the attention called to the nose. In another case, I photographed a girl who was severely burned, had severe gasoline burns on the front plane of her face. Now, you know, one of the techniques we use to correct for any major problem is to hide the problem. Now, we can either hide it behind an object like this. That's not very effective when we're dealing with the front plane of the face. The second idea that we can use to diminish attention to the problem is to throw it in shadow. That's basically what we were doing. Now, let's go ahead and dramatize this by very gently and very carefully and very slowly feathering the fill. You see the diminished attention to the front plane of the face. Now let's go clear around so we have no fill at all. Okay, now you see what the real extreme would be. So we can go from there to, let's go ahead and bring the fill up full. Gently bring it around now, feather it full. Depending on the seriousness of the problem, we can go all the way around to full fill. So this is a technique. Try it. You'll find it to be very, very useful for certain serious frontal facial problems. Hey, let's talk about glasses glare. Have you seen any of it lately around your studio? Well, it's a problem for all of us. There are some ways we can correct for glasses glare, and let's talk about those now. One of the very easy ways that we can correct is by just simply reaching up and tipping the glasses down until you diminish the glare. And that's the way you can take care of it in some instances. Of course, if you have a subject with short hair where the glasses tipped up is going to show, it could create some problems for you. Let's talk about some other ways that we can correct for the problem. One of the ways that we can correct is simply by communication with the customer. let me demonstrate a couple of ways that we in our studio try to communicate with the customer so that we can eliminate the problem. Of course, it's always better to eliminate it than it is to correct for it. Each customer who makes an appointment to our studio gets a map that directs them to our studio. Remember, we're way out in the woods, and it's very difficult to find. In fact, it's almost impossible to find without a map. They get the map, which has a reminder of their appointment date on it, but they also get a little sheet which we call to answer your questions for your portraits. And on here we suggest this. We suggest that they stop by their optometrist or their doctor and get glasses, an empty pair of frames, so that they might have their sitting taken without the glare problem. Now let's see how this works. Here are my regular glasses. I take them off and I put on a pair of frames that are similar. Voila! The glare is gone. In most cases, the fact that there are no glasses in the frames doesn't create any problem. Now let me slip my glasses on again for another demonstration, and also so that I'll be able to read a little thing that we have in our brochures which calls attention to this matter also. So they get it when they make an appointment, they get a reference to it when they make an appointment, and they also get a reference to it in all of our literature. Now here's our 4-color 8-page brochure that seniors get when they come to our studio. In this 4-color brochure, we mention this about glasses. Glasses can be a serious problem. Please borrow empty frames from your doctor. We cannot be responsible for problems caused by glasses. Outdoor sittings with glasses are very difficult, and remember, we charge for removing glasses glare. That's a fairly strong statement to those who do wear glasses, and in most cases it stimulates them to go ahead and stop by their optometrist and bring an empty pair into the studio. Now, in the event that that fails, we go to plan 2. Some time ago we acquired from an eye doctor about 100 empty frames. What we do now for those folks who don't stop by their doctor and pick up an empty pair, we offer them the opportunity to select one of ours, and that pretty well eliminates the problem around our studio. There are some methods in lighting that can be used to diminish the problem, but none of them are very effective due to shadows. The best way, I believe, to correct for the glare problem on glasses is to make sure they are aware of it, communicate with them, see if they can bring the empty frames in, let them know that they will be charged for any artwork, because it can be a serious, serious problem. They will be charged for any artwork necessary to remove the glare. Offer them a selection of empty frames, and then just hope that you don't have to do extreme lighting to correct for the problem. Baldness is something we as professional photographers have to contend with on a daily basis. I'd like to introduce you to my friend Jim. I've asked him to come in. It's always kind of fun when you ask somebody to come in because they're bald-headed, right, Jim? Mm-hmm. But Jim has consented, and we appreciate it, to come in and help us demonstrate the corrective procedures to diminish or to correct the baldness in an individual. Let's first visit a little bit about baldness. We don't always want to eliminate the problem completely. In fact, sometimes we can't. What we are after, though, in our corrective procedures is we want to minimize that so that we don't have a glaring area up here that dominates the portrait. We want still to maintain this as the dominant feature of the portrait. There are 3 different ways that we can use to control or to help correct baldness. One is camera position. Let's go to some extremes here, and I'll ask Jim to drop his head way down, almost on the chest. That certainly is an extreme. We've got all this area with a very high camera angle. Now let's ask Jim to raise his head, and there's the other extreme. We have no baldness. We've corrected the problem completely. neither one of those is going to work, because I don't think Jim would enjoy a portrait like this. So let's strike a happy medium, where we may have a camera angle about like this with the normal individual. Rather than raising and lowering the video camera, which is a little more difficult to raise and lower than our own in the studio, I'm going to ask Jim to raise that head just a little bit, and we'll keep just a little higher head position, which is the same as reducing the camera, lowering the camera position. The second way to eliminate baldness or help correct the problem is by hiding it or blocking it. Now we can do that, as we will show in just a moment, with a hat. We're going to use a hat to eliminate the baldness where it's appropriate, and it's a good tool to use on occasions. The third way is by light control. Probably the most effective way, the way that you will use most often, will be this way. And again, a little later on, we will demonstrate how you can use a head screen to almost completely diminish the effect of baldness, keeping the area of emphasis right in the facial plane. Let's start now by making another point. I think it's pretty well agreed among professional photographers that you don't need a hair light with someone who's bald. This certainly does emphasize the baldness. So what we want to do at this point is to just completely get rid of the hair light. Now let's demonstrate how we can use a hat. Jim happens to be a wealthy rancher in our area, and well, maybe not wealthy, huh, Jim? Just a rancher. He's got several acres and a nice pond. So it might be appropriate for Jim, we'll just drop that head down then a little bit, Jim. It might be appropriate for Jim to wear a hat. So let's just demonstrate how we could use a hat to correct the problem of baldness, and how we would like that portrait to make a nice, interesting portrait that his family would really enjoy, that would look great on his mantelpiece in his home. First thing we want to do then is go ahead and bring in our main light. And this is almost getting into dramatic impact photography, which we have covered quite extensively in another video module. We'll bring that in, and we want to be sure to bring it down low enough to where we pick up the eyes in the portrait. Okay. The next thing that we want to do is we're going to feather that fill light slightly. Not a whole lot in here. That's great. We could even pick up the hair light again on this particular portrait, because we could put a little bit of separation in there on the side of that hat. We don't have to worry about the baldness in this particular instance, since we do have a hat blocking it. Now what I want to do now is come in nice and tight. We're going to come in just real tight on him to where we're going to crop into this hat about like this. We're going to go down just a tiny bit with that chin, Jim. Tip that head right, hole right in there is perfect. Okay, then we're going to just give us a little bit of a separation with that background light back here, and that will raise a little bit here, right about there. And I think we may feather the fill just a tiny bit more. We'll just turn it just a little bit. Tip that head just a little, Jim. Good. Extend that head out just a little. Okay, right there. And now we're going to drop in our combination vignetter and diffuser. So we're going to just crop off the bottom just a little bit and a little on that hat. And right there we have a dynamite portrait that would look just really, really good in Jim's home. One of the basic tools of correctional photography or corrective photography is the head screen. Let me say this, if you don't have a head screen or two in your studio, I believe that you're not making available to your customers the benefits of one of the greatest, one of the best tools of corrective photography and of photography in general. This head screen, or gobo as we sometimes call it, because it goes between, gobo, goes between the light and the subject, is just an absolute gem of a tool, and I don't think I could get along without it. Let's demonstrate now how we use that for light control to diminish the area in the portrait that we want to diminish, which in the case of my friend Jim here is the bald area right here. So we're going to use the gobo to cast a shadow on that so it's not quite so obvious in the portrait. let's begin now, and we'll bring in the main light and begin the initial lighting. And the light we'll bring in, and this will be a fairly dramatic lighting. We're not too concerned about the top of the head right now. We're concerned mainly about getting a nice lighting on the face of the subject. And Jim, I'm going to have you looking right in here at me, right in here, good, right there. And then we'll just maintain that eye direction here for just a little bit until I tell you to stop right in here, good. Okay, the second thing we want to do now is we're going to feather our fill so we can build the contrast. We need the contrast to work with a little bit more, a little more, and then we're going to bring the camera in whole right there. A little too much. Let's go back just a little bit right there. Great. Now you see the obvious problem, and I left the hair light on to make a point. We definitely do not want a hair light in this particular portrait, so I'll just turn that off. Then we'll correct our background light here, which we want to be very gently on the background in front of Jim, on the area of the main light. That's going to be good right there. Okay, now we're going to introduce our corrective tool, the gobo, between the main light and Jim's head, and just look and see what's going to happen here. We'll come down just a little bit. We can block all the light, or we can just take the light off the forehead. And that's about what we want right in there. Now these just take a little bit to get adjusted properly. They're a little flippy-floppy on there. And that's what we want right there. Now, the final technique that we'll use is we'll drop in our combination vignetter and diffuser, and we'll bring that chin down just a little bit, Jim. Okay. That's good. Now, what I want to do is just feather that fill light just a tiny bit more. Good. Chin down just a little bit, Jim. Okay, that's the finished portrait right there. See how we've maintained the emphasis in the frontal plane area, and from here on out we've optically almost removed the top of Jim's head. When he sees that portrait in his proof folio, he'll like it very much. I hope you'll find these techniques on corrective photography helpful and useful to you in your studio. You know, I've used these for 10 years. They've worked very, very well for me. Try them. I encourage you to try them. I think you'll find out that you'll please your customer, you'll please and satisfy yourself, be very, very rewarded, and maybe best of all, you'll please that banker too.